Hello, everyone. My name is Zuzy, and welcome to Worldbuilding Secrets. Our first episode, we have a very special member of our Unioverse team, Brent Friedman. Welcome, Brent. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Where are you at the moment?
I am in sunny Ventura, California, about 2 blocks from
Beautiful.
the beach. Just chilling out for a couple days.
Nice and warm.
You can hear the train in the background.
Well, I'm in the city, so if there's any random noises, I apologize. Okay, first question. Are you ready?
I think so.
When did you first start writing? And did you know since you were a kid, or was it more of a spontaneous decision as you were growing up?
Ooh, it's going way back.
Yep.
So when I was growing up, I was labeled, not respectfully, the class clown. I wanted to do a lot of acting. I was in theater. I made little movies with friends, and I thought I was going to be an actor. I started writing my own plays, my own monologues, just as a means to an end. I wrote not because I thought I was good at writing or necessarily that I liked writing, but I wanted to give myself my own material. When I went to UCLA to be an actor, my very first day of drama class, I misjudged how far away the class was on campus. It's a big campus. And I was 5 minutes late. And I rushed into the room, huffing and puffing. And the professor, who was straight off of like an off-Broadway stage with a little ascot and a goatee and bifocals,
I can picture it.
looked at me very judgmentally, and I started to try and explain, and he just pointed to this back corner of the room where I was supposed to go. And I kind of looked around, and I noticed that everyone else was down on the floor on mats, and they were writhing around. And so I kind of walked past everyone, kind of thinking, what is going on here? And I looked down, and there's my mat, and I kind of raised my hand, and I said, what are we doing? And he said, you will be a wave.
What?
And I said, what? A wave. You will be a wave.
Oh my God.
I'm thinking, oh, okay, it's like an acting exercise. We're supposed to be a wave. And just because I'm a smart ass, I said, well, why would I be a wave? And he goes, because the director told you you are a wave.
Oh my
I said,
God.
well, I go, okay, but I'd never take that part. And he said, out of my class.
Oh my God.
So
That sounds terrifying.
And only to find out that was the head of the acting department at UCLA. So my acting career actually ended before it even started. And I quickly needed to figure out what is my plan B. And
Oh my
after
goodness.
a couple weeks of being quite despondent, I thought, wait a minute. The other thing I can do is write. I used to write all the time, but I never really thought about it. And I thought, and this is great because then I don't have to deal with directors or being a wave. I can just sit in my room and write.
Yep.
And so I completely shifted my major and went into did a double major of English Lit and creative writing, and my career as a writer was born.
Can you tell me what does world building mean, and how did you first get into it?
Let's start with the easy part. World building to me means pretty much what it sounds like. It means very intentionally building a fictional world on which an entire franchise can be built and stories can be told from. Or I would say, if the world is built properly, stories will organically flow from that world, right? And so it's many projects I've been brought onto have already started building a world, but they haven't been doing it intentionally. They've just been saying, okay, we need a location and we need some characters, but they haven't been thinking about, well, why does this world exist? What makes it unique? And how is it going to feel alive? And so the best projects are the ones that I believe start at the inception and build a world as the platform on which everything else can take place. Mm-hmm. And, it's hard to say like when it occurred to me or the first time I was brought in to specifically build a world, but I think a lot of it goes back to one of the first projects I did at Electronic Arts back around 2005, 2006, where I was brought in on a project called Command and Conquer, which is a famous game franchise. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to refresh or reimagine their world. And so we kind of
an existing
world that had mm-hmm. been a pretty successful game franchise, but they wanted to move it from one that was more kind of satirical to one that was more serious. And so what that meant was trying to ground it, trying to kind of create a whole undergirding of logic and cohesion to a universe that was really kind of made just to be fun. And so that was a really challenging project. It's almost mm-hmm. like there's a house and someone says, oh, you know what? This was built way before, they had earthquake codes in California. Now, if you want it insured, you have to go in and you can keep the house, but you have to change the foundation. It's like, well, how do you redo the foundation of a house, but still keep it, right?
Yeah.
So it was that kind of project. And I think I spent several years working on that project. And from it, I really learned, wow, this should all be done up front. It was so difficult. Yeah, from the beginning. It was so difficult that I think it naturally occurred to me that when possible, this should be the first step in building a game or a TV show or a movie or whatever, like really give some thought. So it's not a kind of a surgical effort to go in and try and fix the foundation of something right. without upsetting the structure.
Would you say you're more excited about projects that want you on board that haven't built anything yet and you really have that opportunity to build something completely from scratch? Or do you actually prefer the challenge of trying to rebuild or restructure an existing universe or world?
Well, I'd like to say the intelligent thing and say, oh no, it's great when I can start from scratch. And it is, right. But there is a masochist part of me that loves creative challenges. Mm-hmm. And so even as I am complaining about the Command and Conquer experience, and I've had many of those type of experiences, I do enjoy them. I do, right. especially because they're never projects, or they're rarely circumstances where I have to take it on alone. I'm doing right. it with a team, and that collaborative, like everyone kind of going, wow, what have we gotten ourselves into? All right, well, let's give it a shot. Like there's something really fun about that.
Right.
And so the answer to the question is I like both. I mean, I love, for instance, the opportunity that the Unioverse provided, right? Let's start at ground zero and mm-hmm. start building and do it with intentionality. But I also love someone saying, bet you can't fix this.
Let's say you're asked to write for a space or to rewrite a story that already exists, and you also have to work with people that you've never worked with before. How do you mm-hmm. How do you go about that? Like, how do you, even with the Unioverse, like, have you worked with the people at the Unioverse before? How do you, artists are very opinionated. Everybody mm-hmm. has their own ways of writing or their own ways of creating. How do you collaborate in a way where, you can agree, but at the same time respect everybody's opinions and the directions that they want to go in?
That's actually even more so than the creative challenges. That's the biggest challenge. going
Yeah,
on any project. People are always the biggest challenge, not the
that's
project.
true.
Um,
That's true.
and so, over the years, I've learned two important lessons. One is that it always works better when you check your ego at the door. So
Hmm.
I've done a lot of things. I know a lot of things, or at least I think I do. But if I come in with that attitude, it's going to push everyone else back, and they're going to have two different reactions. One is their ego is going to be tweaked, and they're going to want to challenge me, or
Hmm.
they're going to feel like, ooh, wow, this person knows much more than I do, so I'm not going to say anything. So I've then, turned potential allies into enemies, or I've silenced people that would be great contributors.
Right.
So that's the first thing, is you need to just be, give yourself over to the project and the process, and not worry about trying to make a good impression and show off what you know.
Right.
And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that there are no bad ideas. I've been in many creative environments where people haven't checked their ego at the door, and they need to look good in a creative environment by putting other people down. So someone says, "Oh, I know we could do this," and a person at the top or in charge would go, "Well, that's a stupid idea. Why would you even say that?"
Yeah.
Now, what's going to happen right there? It's not just that one person has been embarrassed, but now everyone around the table is thinking, "Oh, I don't want to get checked like that. I'm not gonna." But so then, how does someone go forward? Like, they don't know. Like, what is a stupid idea? It's a very subjective thing.
Right.
So for me, it's like when people throw out ideas, even if in my mind I'm thinking, "Well, that's a stupid idea," I don't say that. I actually try and say, "Wow, that's interesting. Why are you proposing that? Like, what's the thinking behind it?" Right? There may be something really of value. And oftentimes,
Right.
if you tease things out enough, you can find something. It's like, "Oh, okay, that's a really good point." Like, yeah, we don't know why this event would have happened, so we should start thinking about that, right? And then so
Right.
suddenly the person feels validated, and there's probably something that's moved the conversation forward in a positive way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Has there been a project, whether you've been a part of it or maybe not, that you feel has set the standard or maybe opened doors for world building and franchises as a whole?
Well, I was fortunate enough to work on Star Wars in the Star Wars franchise for a number of years. In
Mhm.
particular, back when George still owned Lucasfilm, and I was working on Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the animated series, and we had a process whereby every year we would all convene at Skywalker Ranch for 2 weeks. And over the course of those 2 weeks, we would every day go up and meet with George up at the main house, the big Victorian, estate, in
I've
this
seen some
huge
photos.
conference
It
room.
looks incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. And we would sit there with George and Dave Filoni, who was, the other creative genius behind the Clone Wars. And we would all just basically say, okay, we've got basically 10 work days to break an entire season of Clone Wars. And the season then was 24 episodes. So we had to come up with 24 stories that were beat out into outlines, so that when we
It's a lot.
broke huddle and left kind of Skywalker Ranch, everyone was going to take, I think there were 6 writers. Everyone would take 4 episodes, or basically
Hmm.
usually they were 4-episode arcs. And then you would go home and you'd write those 4 episodes over the next number of months. But what struck me was that as we were breaking stories, someone would say, Dave Filoni would say, "Oh, you know what we should do? We should set this on a water planet." And George would say, "Yeah, that's a great idea. Like, let's see what we have." And there would be a call made to the art department or the story department or something, and people would bring in huge rolling carts of all of the art that had been developed over the years and concept designs and whatnot for water planets, right? Or water worlds. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. Meaning it wasn't that George stopped developing the universe just because he wasn't making a new movie or his mind was always going. He had people on staff. They were constantly building out the universe or the galaxy far, far away, to be more accurate. And I thought that is such a fantastic way of thinking about this, because you can say, oh, I've created a world that has endless opportunities. But if the world is constantly expanding, right, through the imagination of amazing artists and designers and writers, then it is a living world. It really is. And there are endless amounts of stories that you could tell and places you can go. And so to me, that's the paragon, right? And part of it is I had the intimate, experience of being there and seeing how it worked on the inside. But it was very inspiring.
Right. I mean, I think one of the most beautiful parts of world building is that you actually get to create a space where people feel like they actually belong. Like this could actually exist. This isn't just a hypothetical thing. And I think that's the most beautiful, that's what makes world building so special, is because there's all these different supporting factors and pillars that create this world. It's not just a book or just a movie or, just a comic or anything like that. So that brings me to what do you think makes world building so important to other forms of media?
Well, and this is something we'll get into a little bit when I walk through my presentation about, universe building. But, the way that the media exists now, the landscape, a franchise needs to be able to kind of exist and thrive on any platform in any medium, because that's where the audience lives. The audience doesn't just live at a movie theater. They don't just live, on one channel.
Everywhere.
They're everywhere. And so for a franchise to truly be successful, it needs to have a transmedia quality. It means that it needs to be malleable enough and to move and to exist and, again, to thrive in any medium. But in order for that to happen, it can't just be a circumstance where the people at the center of it are just licensing out the franchise left and right and saying, just send me the check, right? When the money starts rolling in, and having no kind of knowledge or oversight over how the franchise is being represented. And so a lot of it is the responsibility of the IP holders, but it's also how that was built from the beginning. How durable is it? So it needs to be two things. It needs to be completely malleable, where it can exist, even if it was a live action, it can exist as a mobile game that's animated without all of the incredible details and whatnot. So, but what that demands to know is, well, what is the DNA that is going to be carried, the creative DNA that's going to be carried to any of these platforms and any of these mediums? And if you don't fully understand that, then you're just, again, licensing off bits and pieces and fragments of the IP without any sense of coherence as it's presented to the audience across all of the mediums and platforms. Right. And that's, I think when you hear that kind of audience say, oh, that's just a cash grab, I think that's code for they didn't take the time to figure out why it should be on this platform or in this medium. And they didn't represent it correctly in the way that it was in the movie when I saw it. Like, this is just a cheap knockoff. Yeah. Right. That's the best way to undermine your franchise. It's almost like with a tree, you say, oh, look, the tree is beautiful. I know, let's just cut off some roots and sell them. Yeah. Right. It's like, but you're killing the tree, right? Yeah,
definitely. And I think it's actually a really difficult thing to do, because technology, everything is changing so quickly. you can wake up one day and suddenly there's this entire new audience living on this new space that you don't really know much about. And you have to try and figure out how can we adapt and reform our story or whatever it is we're trying to share to target and to make sure that it's communicated the right way to these people and it doesn't come off as a cash grab. I was watching an interview of yours, I think it was from like 10 years ago. And you were asked a question, and your response to it, you said once in a sentence, you said a couple words that really resonated with me, which is building a universe worthy of devotion. And I think that it's almost like the motto of world building to me. And that's how it resonated with me, because the word devotion and worthiness, there's such emotional and such powerful words that aren't easy emotions to bring out of people and to communicate from a storytelling perspective. So could you let's Brian, our lovely producer, could you maybe bring up our first presentation that Brent kindly shared with us about creating a universe worthy of devotion?
Yes, let's talk about this. Well, if you can go back one slide, I'm going to give just a little preamble to kind of answer Zuzy's question about what is the purpose of setting out such a lofty goal of creating a universe worthy of devotion. And I think, as I was saying earlier, we live in a world that's 24/7, right? In terms of media, people want to watch what they love all the time, any place, anywhere.
Constant access.
And it's no longer enough to just gain fans' attention, right? Attention is, a momentary thing. It's ephemeral. It can go away. Fans and the audience in general want much more from their media nowadays. They want to be immersed in the stories and the characters and the incumbent community around those stories and characters, because they want to form a connection, right. with the content and the community. And it's critical then to, from the beginning, when possible, to design with intention your intellectual property that is going to be a universe worthy of devotion, where ultimately fans can pledge their loyalty through the transmedia experience that you're going to offer them, that we just talked about, through being able to share their experiences through social channels, and then most importantly, to co-create with the IP owners their expression of devotion and their expression of their identity in that world. And then I think you have something that, kind of like with the best franchises that we can point to, whether it's Star Wars or Harry Potter, you have something that becomes generational, where you have fans that grew up with something that then they pass on that love and devotion to their kids, right? That is something that is the greatest test, I think, of a franchise is, when people can say, this means so much to me, I want to share it with someone else, and I want to bring you in to be part of this community, when it's family, friends.
It's beautiful.
And then, there's the business side of devotion, which is, you've heard the expression, all you need is 1,000 true fans, right?
Yeah.
Who will buy anything, right? Attached to, an artist or an IP. And I think
quality over quantity.
Right. And I think this notion that when you can get to the level where, the majority of your fan base or your audience is devoted to something, it's because you've given them something of extreme value. You've made their world better with your IP, right? And so they're going to do everything they can to keep your IP alive and vital, right? Because they're entangled.
Yep.
So that's kind of, that's why this, I think, is a worthy goal. And it's difficult. It's, if this is one of those things where if it was easy, everyone would do it, right? It
Right.
takes the right partners. It takes the right kind of opportunity in terms of time and resources to
Hmm.
be able to do this correctly.
Absolutely.
So,
And I think
Brian,
within the Unioverse content, just context, we're at that very early beginning stage where we are building that foundation. So I think everything that we're covering here for context.
yeah, absolutely. I
Imagine.
mean, I was going to say, I think that it's a great point that the Unioverse, for me, represented this fantastic opportunity to bring kind of my knowledge and my experience to a place where I had fantastic partners, right, in Wyeth and Tony, and then all of the team that they had already assembled, and to start at kind of ground zero and start saying, okay, well, here are some ideas, and that I could apply and utilize some of these principles that I'm going to walk you through to start building out what we have set in motion.
Yeah.
That was, like, as I said before, that was kind of one of the paths that I love to walk. And that is actually the one that's the most infrequent. It's very rare that
It is
you
rare.
get this opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So there are 6 pillars in this concept of a universe worthy of devotion. And I think that the interesting thing about this idea of a universe worthy of devotion is that you have to understand how the creative process works. It oftentimes starts with like a big bang, right? It's like you have this idea that kind of goes off in your head. And then from that moment, it's kind of the responsibility of the creator to kind of tame it and to shape it and to turn it into something. And oftentimes the instinct is to just let it go, to let it be its own thing, which there's value in that. But at the same time, part of what I've learned to do is say, okay, kind of let that happen over here. Well, I start to become more intentional in terms of trying to shape it. So think of like, putting a big lump of clay on a wheel, right? And, having to like form it into something. It's a much more hands-on approach rather than just kind of letting the creativity flow out.
Right.
And I've tried it, both ways. And I've found that being intentional and really thinking at the formative stage about the structure and the pillars is super important, because you want everything to feel alive, right? But you also want there to be some cohesion to it, some
Right.
logic
Structure.
to it at the center of it, right? And because if we talked about this earlier, if you build it with this intention and this kind of this sense of design to it, where it does feel alive, but it also feels like it's been built to last, right? That there are legs to it, right? Then what you ultimately can come up with is you can come up with a world that, as I said, organically, kind of lets stories flow from it, and that can go on in perpetuity. And that's the goal, I would think, of any kind of franchise creator, IP rights holder, is to have a limitless property, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's go to the first pillar. The way I like to think of this is the macro kind of view of the universe. And this is something that I think is represented really well by Mordor in the Lord of the Rings series. And I think what's great about Mordor is that they use it as a way to express the omnipresence of evil in the universe. It's almost like as the whole series is unfolding, they're constantly seeing this in the background, and the characters are aware that they cannot be heroes, they cannot save the day until they go to that location. It's almost like it's calling them. It's inexorable.
Right.
And to me, that's a great example of how the environment and the location can tell story. That it's not just about the characters talking and interacting, it's the environmental storytelling, if you will. And
Right.
so think about Middle Earth, and that journey that the characters take through Middle Earth to Mordor. As they move through the landscape, Tolkien so beautifully seeded all of the lands with lore. And even in the movies, they don't go to all of the places that the books do, but the books still kind of carve a circuitous path, from the Shire all the way to Mordor. And
Right.
there's all of these things that are referred to kind of in the periphery, right? That are part of the world, but not part of the plot. And so characters can be kind of walking through Middle Earth and say, "Oh, you see that castle up on the hill? I knew the man who lived there," and blah blah blah. And it's like, but the story doesn't go there. We don't have time. We need to get to Mordor and be heroes. The fan is thinking, "Well, wait a minute, but I want to know more about that man," right?
Yeah.
Even when the story goes to a place like the Mines of Moria, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you see is there's a whole world within that one location. There's a whole deep history of how the dwarves had all this, they dug too deep and they unleashed this thing. And what it does is it becomes a microcosm for the entire world. And so, eventually the characters say, "Oh, this isn't about the Mines of Moria. We're still trying to get to Mordor." But from a fan standpoint, what you've done is you've said, okay, there's a past in this entire world. There's a guy that's living in a castle up on the hill. There's this incredible world of Moria. I want to know more about those places. I want to go.
Like a spark of curiosity.
Right. And so it's not enough to just tell the story of the plot. You need to think about the world. And so as the plot moves through a world, you need to be able to let the audience look out the window and go, "What is that? Right. Over there? What's going on over there? Wait, that sign implies there's something really interesting. Can we turn off? No, we can't. Oh, wait a minute. But if you go play a game, you can turn off, right? And now you can go explore that. If you go read, the graphic novel about the man up on the hill, then the way that you've built the world is pulling the audience into other mediums, right?
Right.
It's sparking that desire to explore the world, to learn more about it. And that was simply based on building that world out with what I call the distant horizons, where there are stories everywhere, just out on the periphery, even if they aren't critical to the central plot. The second pillar seems somewhat obvious, but I think it's one of those components that's critical, because with aspirational heroes, I think when you have especially a big fictional world, like a universe worthy of devotion, has characters in it that are both kind of relatable, whether it's Rey in Star Wars or Frodo in Lord of the Rings or even Neo in The Matrix. You have characters who embody certain traits, right? They're on a spectrum of they're already kind of confident and bold, or they're much more kind of Frodo, the reluctant hero who doesn't know what he's capable of until the journey pulls it out of him, right?
Right.
And so a lot of times you have characters, and what makes them relatable is this compelling mix of kind of flaws and virtues, right? Characters who either are insecure or uncertain that they can do something, or they're too confident and they're too cocky and they need to be put down.
Right.
So they aren't perfect, right? The journey is going to turn them into heroes. They're more aspirational humans that become heroes.
Right.
But they all have those unique goals and dreams. They all want to do more and to be more. And they often have what I consider to be these three virtues, which is curiosity, courage, and creativity. And the idea is that the curiosity pulls you off your path. It pulls you out of your comfort zone. So back to Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, he's living on a farm with his aunt and uncle, but there's something missing in his life. There's some feeling that there's more to what he's supposed to do than be a farmhand, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
that curiosity, that wanting to know more, manifests almost magically in this message that he finds on R2D2, right? And he could just let it go. He could say, I don't want to get into this, but something's calling him and pulling him. And the same way that Neo is getting exposed to something and wanting to know what the matrix is, right? Leading to the blue pill or the red pill, right?
Yeah.
And that curiosity is something that we all have. We all live in a world where we occasionally think, is there more? Is there something I'm missing? Like, could I be more? And heroes are the ones that answer that question with action.
Yeah. Could you also maybe talk a little bit about also how that curiosity sparks, because bravery, where we feel curiosity, but most of the times we're afraid or not really as open to go forward and go and do what intrigues us. So how these characters are actually pillars of, they're examples for so many people out there that I'm sure motivate others to really go for what they find curious and want to, continue and pursue.
You're hitting the nail right on the head. As the second word implies, courage. It's the courage to follow up on the question. Is there more? I'm going to take the steps, right? To go see. I'm going to go confront the obstacles that have held me back. And then when I find myself in a world outside of my comfort zone, I'm going to have to be creative about how to stay alive and how to learn more and how to keep moving. And so it's those virtues, right, that I think embody the through line of a heroic adventure. And to your point, what it does for the fan is it models adventures, meaning it inspires people to think about their own lives. It inspires people to think, I want to be in that world, taking those journeys and those adventures that the characters have. And then it manifests when you go to fan cons and you see how people inhabit the costumes. They want to emulate these heroes.
That's
they
so
want
true.
to be that hero for a day. They identify with it because it's an aspirational character, but some part of them has connected with it, right? And it means so much to them. And partly because of what you said, they're doing something that we wish we could do.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Absolutely.
that's why it's really important you can still have villains. You need to have villains. You need to have all range of characters. But at the core of it, the world needs to be explored by characters that embody those virtues of curiosity, courage, and creativity. Now, move on to the next slide. The next slide is super important. It's what I call the binding principle. And it's essentially the big idea that holds the entire world together and informs every aspect of the narrative.
Okay.
I've chosen this particular image, which, if anyone is not a Star Trek fan, that is the Enterprise. Now, before I get to the Enterprise and I tell you why I think it's the binding principle, let me explain that I think of it as what's called a factional conceit. So fact and fiction. So it's factional, meaning it doesn't exist. It's imaginary, but it's grounded enough where you could say, well, I could kind of believe that it could exist, right? It makes just enough sense, or it's just a really powerful metaphor for something that I understand in my own life. So, for instance, a binding principle would not be a 60-foot, purple unicorn that has lasers out its eyes, right? It's like, okay, well, that could be the center of a franchise, but it's not really ever going to become a universe worthy of devotion because it doesn't pull you in and make you believe that this is possible.
Yeah, it's not believable.
Some based on some of the franchises we've already spoken about, some really good ones would be, what is the binding principle of Star Wars in your mind?
The Force.
Correct. The Force, because if you took the Force out, you could still have characters that were fighting and trying to gain control and whatnot. But they wouldn't, at the highest level, the war wouldn't be fought between Jedi, who tap into the Force for the light, and the Sith, who tap into it for the dark. And that elevates everything from just a basic kind of space scrum to Star Wars, right? It gives it the depth, and it gives it, the Force represents spirituality, but it represents literally the empowerment that comes through spirituality, right? Yeah. By imbuing a Jedi with the ability to do crazy flips with a sword in their hand, with a light sword in their hand, or to actually move things with their mind. But like anything, it's also something that has a duality to it, meaning it can be used for the dark or it can be used for the light. So
how important is that contrast, for example, do you think the fact that there is a light and dark side is what makes the Force, if that makes sense?
Yes.
Like what if there was no light and dark side?
It's a representation of how we live. So think about going back to the initial compulsion of a universe worthy of devotion is one where a fan or the audience feels immersed in it. So there's immersing yourself in something means you're letting go, right? There's a familiarity, there's an understanding. And so if you come into a place where it's like, there's certain values and ideas that seem like real life to me and that I can just intuit, then it's much easier to immerse yourself in it because you can understand and then you can find where you line up in that world, which is very important. And we'll talk about that in just a second. The other thing is that it's also, when we're talking about aspirational heroes, this idea that the binding principle also manifests character need. So in order to aspire to the highest heights of that universe, you have to be able to understand the Force, if not connect to it, right? That is the thing that lives up there, that it's the brass ring that you're trying to reach for. Another great example, which I'll throw out, is in Lord of the Rings, not the entire Middle-earth universe, although the way that the universe is built, I would say this is kind of the center, if not the binding principle, is Lord of the Rings. What I would consider to be the binding principle of that is the One Ring of power, because that is the ring that in the Lord of the Rings, everything revolves around that. If you take away that one ring of power, then there's people still fighting and there's, squabbles and whatnot. But what's at stake with the one ring of power is complete control of Middle Earth, right? In the same way that in Star Wars, if the Empire completely controls the Force, right, then they control the galaxy far, far away. And if the Jedi can stop the Empire and blow up there and take, dismantle their kind of whole war machine, then there's freedom. So everything in these big universes kind of move between control and freedom. Think about the world that we live in. We live in a world where we're constantly vacillating between, kind of resisting anything that controls us, right, and takes away our freedom.
Yeah.
So these are very recognizable elements that are never explicitly called control and freedom necessarily, but we recognize them as something that feels like a simulacrum of the real world. And that allows us, again, to just kind of immerse ourselves in it because of that familiarity. And what it does ultimately, in Lord of the Rings, it's the One Ring is, it manifests the character need in so much as if the Fellowship does not destroy the ring, if they do not make this perilous trek to Mordor and somehow destroy the ring, then all of Middle Earth will be enslaved. So the need, right, to stay free is represented in that ring. And yet, what does the ring do? It tempts anyone that holds on to it to take it and take control and control everyone else. And so it's this like super powerful thing, right? But it also does something really important, which is it offers choice. So for the fan, for the characters and the fan, you have a choice. Do you want to be part of the group that is trying to take control of the ring and get it to Sauron? Or do you want to risk your life to destroy it? Pick a side, right?
Yeah.
As an audience member, I can say, yeah, but when I go to a fan con, I want to be an orc, right? I want to look like an orc. Those are so cool. And yeah, you know what? I would want to take control of Middle Earth. That's cool, right?
Yeah.
That's fine. That's a perfectly valid choice. In the same way that I can be Luke Skywalker, or I can be Rey, I can be a Jedi, or I can be Darth Maul, or I can be Darth Vader.
You can be anybody.
You can be anybody because both sides are equally valid. Both sides are equally important. And the battle for power and control, it's like, yeah, well, sometimes the bad guys are winning, and it's cool to be on the winning side, right?
Yeah.
So very important. And you even see it in, again, examples like in The Matrix, you know, the Joe Pantoliano character makes a choice. I want to live in the Matrix, right? I want to have a nice house. I want to eat steak. I don't want to eat this sludge.
Yeah.
It's too hard. I don't want to live like this anymore. Okay.
Absolutely.
So go to the Matrix, right? Or you're the group that's trying to bring the Matrix down. Control.
The amount of heated conversations that I've had with my friends debating who would choose to stay and who would choose to leave. I mean, you can get into hour-long conversations and debates, but I think that's the incredible part, because any debate that I've actually, even when I was watching Star Wars, or I was watching the new Obi-Wan Kenobi show as well, and I've noticed the pattern of, like, anytime I watch those kinds of shows, and it always comes down to this question, like, would you be on the light or would you be on the dark side? Like, would you want to work for Vader or would you want to be with Skywalker? Like, what would be your choice, right? And those conversations, like the heat of them, the intensity, I think that's when everything that we're kind of just spoke or are speaking about, it really almost, like, it makes sense to me now, because we subconsciously are almost like not aware of it, right? Because I'm voicing an opinion on a TV show. Or something I've watched, but having it in this, like, just imagining it that is why, is because you have this incredible choice to really, there's no right or wrong answer. You can debate forever. It's incredible.
No, and the
it's
fact
really
that a universe worthy of devotion opens itself to all interpretations, to all sides, mostly because the story constantly shifts back and forth, right? You can imagine a world in which Sauron wins, gets the ring, but the forces down, you know, in Middle Earth, they're going to figure out a way to rise up and you know, destroy the One Ring. What's going to happen? Someone's going to make a new ring, right?
Yeah.
And there's going to be new magical powers that are all bound up that try and control everyone, because that is the imperative that we live in, right? Everyone is always trying to take control, whether it's of their own life or, you know, the city they live in or the world, right? It's baked into our DNA. And so to see it manifest in a universe like that, it reminds us of our own life and our own world, and it becomes instantly relatable. One of the key things here that's, that's different than I would say Distant Horizons is that Distant Horizons referred to the macro, and this is much more about the micro, and the idea that it pertains to every location that you see as you explore the world in any expression of it, mobile game, comic book, doesn't matter. And a perfect example of this right here is the Halo ring from the Halo franchise. Now, having worked in the Halo franchise, there's different ways you can interpret it. And I've had this argument with people. It's like, oh, what's the binding principle of the Halo franchise? Some people could say it's the Halo ring, right, itself, which is great because it's this big emblematic thing that is literally causing two races to fight over it, and probably in perpetuity. Because why? They both believe they were chosen by the race that built it, which was called the Forerunners. So the Forerunners have disappeared. Unfortunately, they're not around to answer the question of who should get it. But
Right.
both these other races, the Covenant and the humans, believe it was meant for them. And so they have this internal war that's going on, trying to take control of the Halo ring. And then you find out other Halo type, creations throughout the universe. But the Halo ring itself represents this incredible location that bespeaks the universe in a microcosm. So, for instance, it represents the hope of mankind. So, if we ever mess up our planet so much, cough, cough, that we need to go someplace else, the Halo ring was like, we've built a utopia for you, literally, that's floating up in this. And if you can get here, you have a world where everything will be here for the rest. It's like a technological Eden.
Wow.
And that represents hope, but it also represents the fear that someone else or another race will take it from us, that will beat us to it. And so that sense of a location that captures all of the struggle, the hope and the fear in its essence, in just its being, it's an intent, is very powerful. Now, going back to my original thought, which was, some people say, oh, well, the forerunners are actually the binding principle. The problem is that the forerunners don't exist. They're kind of legendary. Like, all you see is kind of the remnants of them. And so you could say, well, that's fine, but what represents the forerunners is the Halo ring. That is the enduring thing. And that's why it's important to say that's the binding principle, because that's what everyone is fighting over. They're not fighting over an ancient forerunner temple. They're fighting over the greatest achievement that the forerunners made, right? And it's the representation of it, or the symbology of what this means.
Definitely. Could you give us, without giving away too much, an example of a symbolic setting in the Unioverse?
Yes, I think so. But the catch is without giving away too much.
Yeah,
so
that's the catch.
So I'm going to just back up for a second here. Let me talk in abstract about what I think the binding principle, what I know the binding principle of.
I think we can share that.
Of the Unioverse is. The binding principle of the Unioverse is what's called the mass on zero. It is a absolutely incredible technological marvel that is discovered in deep space, that is an intergalactic transportation system, that instead of ships having to have light speed travel, this is a system that allows an individual to travel anywhere in the cosmos by projecting their consciousness into another body. And so this, kind of like the Halo ring, we understand that this thing was built by creators, right? That were what humans ultimately call or refer to as the creators, but they don't know why. They don't know how, certainly. And it just exists. And what's fascinating about it is that it has a network that has been, I'm not going to explain how this happens yet, but it has connected all of these different planets throughout the entire universe into this network that has nodes where everyone can kind of jump to, which all leads back to the answer to your question. The symbolic setting then is what's called the hub. It's the spaceport, if you will, that is just adjacent to the mass on zero, that lives kind of in the shadow of the mass on zero. And
Does it
it's the
orbit
grand
it?
central.
Or is it?
Well, it's essentially existing kind of like a moon around a sun. And so there's a lot of questions about how this was built, when it was built. There's a lot of like ancient history. The story that we're telling takes place in what's called the second cycle. There's a whole first cycle of when this thing was up and running, and then mysteriously it shut down for a long period of time. And Now humans kind of start the whole second cycle of it. But the hub itself becomes, again, that grand central station, right? That represents the promise of being able to travel anywhere you want in the universe. But it also represents that coagulation of all of these different races with different agendas.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of conflict and tension there, but at the same time, it's completely representative of the aspirational hope that I can go anywhere. And so that's a perfect example, I think, of a symbolic setting where the hub is not the binding principle,
Right.
but it is absolutely tied to and informed by it in a way that is central to the understanding of how the whole kind of DNA of the universe works. And just while I'm on this topic for a second, one of the things that hit me, remember I talked about like having that Big Bang idea?
Yep.
When we were first starting out talking about like, well, what could we do? Like, what kind of universe do we want to build? There was a lot of like business and gaming kind of parameters that we wanted to capture. And so this idea of doing something around intergalactic transportation was kind of out there. And so what I got as the big idea was I said, well, what if what everything is based on is the idea of an intergalactic internet? So if you think about it, right now on our planet, like we can connect with any other place on the planet, right?
Yeah.
And it's not exactly our consciousness, but it's not our body. It's not, we're not being teleported someplace else.
No.
But so what if that existed in an intergalactic fashion, right? And instead of being able to be in Ventura and talk to you in New York, I'm on planet X and I can contact planet Y by simply jumping there instantaneously with my conscious. So it's
the dream.
It's a literal internet, right? And so that was kind of the basis for, whoa, okay, that's a big idea. That's interesting. And so from there, I just started kind of crafting, well, what would this be? How would this work? There's a central conceit here that I will say very intentionally, there's been tons of discussion internally about what did the creators, why did they do this? How did they do this? What's inside the mass on zero that's allowing this to happen? And my answer to all of those questions is, I'm not going to tell you. And central to this being a durable franchise is those questions cannot and should not be answered. Now, that's not to say I have a pretty good idea, and everyone on the team has their own ideas and their own theories, and we talk about them often. And fans will have their own ideas and theories, and you will have characters. We have whole storylines about characters that have built a belief system out of what the creator's intent was, what it means, how they do it. But it can't be answered. And the reason is that we live in a world where we don't have the answers to our own existence. Yeah. We don't know what happens in the afterlife. We don't, and we all kind of want to know. And we hear people say, oh, I had a near-death experience and this is what happens. Right. And we go, oh, that's interesting. But we don't really believe it unless it happened to us. Right.
No.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
I say, it's like living life or attempting to live life knowing how you die and what happens after you die and when you die.
Yeah.
The world is live life like that?
Yeah.
It's not interesting.
So the Unioverse will become much less interesting if we ever say definitively, oh, here's what's going on, right? So a lot of our world building was to build a world that held the mass on zero up kind of on a pedestal and created a whole layer of characters that are all striving to understand it, to take control of it, right? And then it comes back to control and freedom. There are the people that believe that this should be a completely free system. It was meant for everyone. And then there are the people that are trying to control it for the good of everyone else, knowing that, hey, this thing was shut down once before and it stopped all kind of interconnectivity.
Yep.
we don't know exactly why that happens, but we want to be very careful with how people use this, right? So that doesn't happen again. But again, depending on which side of the fence you're on, that can be seen as, benevolence or malevolence, right? And so it creates this constant tension in the universe. And to give an example of what you don't want to do, I will go back to, one of the greatest universes around, which is Star Wars, and say, as we talked about, the Force is this amazing binding principle. And one of the biggest mistakes George ever made was when he tried to explain it, when he invented metachlorians, right? And then the fans revolted, right? And the whole thing was, no, I don't want it explained. Like, it's so much cooler when I don't know.
Yeah, that's so true.
So, yeah.
Oh my
so
goodness.
it's a good lesson, right, to world builders.
Yeah.
Like, don't think that everything needs to be explained, because that's not how life is.
There's your secret. Secret number one.
Yes. Okay. So, so another one important thing too is that, is every setting that you cross, big or small, should have significance to the characters, right? One of the tendencies that you see in a lot of like mid-tier franchises is they kind of cater to this idea that, oh, this will look cool. Let's just build this to look cool.
Right.
Or this is a really great place for an action scene. And so, but what happens is that in that moment, you're not in the world anymore. You're in the action scene. Whereas the best universes are the ones where every setting has been given thought and it has meaning, or it reinforces the ideas of the universe, or it has strong, deep significance to the characters.
Right.
By building these type of settings, one of the things that you do is you create really indelible worlds, and parts of worlds that fans recreate. So you can go and like online and start looking at, the Halo universe, Star Wars, Matrix, whatever, and see tons of fan art, right? That is done, whether it's in paintings or whether it's in, Maya, whatever form it takes, whether it's in, Legos or clay. People build the things that they become obsessed with, that they can't get out of their heads. And that's what you want. You want people that are so kind of devoted to something that they want to recreate it and have it in their own world, right? To take it out of the fictional world and put it into their own.
Absolutely.
Okay, so moving on to the next one. This is the fifth one. This is a simple one, but also super important. This is one of what I call the execution layer, where you want to have a defining tone. You want to have something where the verbal and visual representation of your world feels totally unique, that has a very consistent voice. So I always think of it as like, if someone's sitting at home and flipping on their remote, all they have to do is see a couple seconds of any image, right, in a movie or a TV show and go, I know exactly what that is, right? Because it's so unique and it's captured, it just could be part of the color palette. So in the Matrix, you think about one of the things it did that was so amazing was it had this singular voice that communicated the entire DNA. And so basically what you're seeing right here is something that tells you reality is not what you think, right? The world of the Matrix, because in the real world, that's not possible. What I'm seeing right there, where someone is slowing down and a bullet is passing because they've avoided it, you can't do that. Well, you can't do it because we live in a matrix, right? Yeah. And they found a way to visually, instead of just telling you that in dialogue, they show you that, right? And they do it in a way that is, they tell you this is not reality. We're going to do these weird grays and greens, and everything's going to have this strange color palette, and the characters are going to be dressed in leather, and it's all, so they create this fictional world that heightens the conflict into something like out of a graphic novel, and the entire movie stays absolutely true to that. And one of the things that it does is when you bust onto the scene and you represent your universe in such a defining way, it creates homage. How many like other movies and TV shows and books and comics and whatnot in the wake of the Matrix latched on to just their visual aesthetic, thinking, if I do that, if I emulate that, I'll be successful, without understanding that they used all the other pillars, right? This was just one of the pillars that they happened to use. Another great example is, Star Wars. Star Wars was a space movie. What did it do? What was it? It was the first movie to actually represent what's called a used future. So George made a point of making sure that, well, this is a real world. So all the ships have to be dented and scratched and scarred because people live here. They've been living here for a long time. It's a used future versus what we saw, like the other great space movie of that era was 2001, where everything was pristine, right? And it worked for that movie because that was our first time that we ever went to outer space with that level of fidelity. But George took it that extra step, and it's one of the defining aspects of that whole universe.
It wouldn't have worked for Star Wars if you try and picture pristine ships and everything looking clean and composed. Like, it just wouldn't work.
And it trickles down then even to the characters. Han Solo with the Millennium Falcon that he's got to kick to get it to work, right? It's broken, it's messed up. Got all of the battle scars that are represented in his snarky character, right? He's world weary, right? He's cynical. Why? Because he's been shot at all this time. Right. So it's really, it's all interconnected and interrelated. Okay, let's go to the last one. This one is last because in some ways it's the most important. Immutable rules. The rules of a universe, they basically inform all the narrative. They tell you what's possible and what's not possible. And what's interesting is that it's central. The central story logic, right, is super important because think about the relationship between the creators and an audience. They don't want the creators to say, haha, bet you didn't know that was possible. Haha, we changed the rules here. Then you're constantly off balance. They want to be in on this and say, I know what the rules are. And the rules say that a character can't do this, but they're stuck in a situation that they're going to die if they don't do something differently, right? That's exactly the situation you want, because then that's how heroes emerge. Heroes figure out a way to bend the rules without breaking them, to subvert things, and then you go, oh, that's how it works, right? These are lessons for people in their own life where it's like, I know there are rules and I'm going to abide by the rules, but sometimes the rules can be bent or interpreted in just a certain way that allow me a lot more flexibility and freedom to express myself, right? Rather than just putting heads down and saying, oh, well, that's not possible. Well, you don't know, there's a lot of things that's possible. So this idea that there are rules in a fictional universe, one of the fun things about it, and I love this image here, is because George created a rule that has been discussed and argued and whatnot. And it's one of those ones that seems arbitrary, right? Which is there can only be two with regards to the Sith. There will always be an apprentice and a master. And if a third person comes in, guess what happens? They end up dead on the floor. There can only be two. Now you could say, well, that just seems arbitrary. Why can't there be three? Why can't there be four? Like, well, no, there can only be two. So it's a completely arbitrary rule, but what George does is he absolutely sticks to it.
Yeah. So
there's constantly stories where there's a third and they're challenging and someone ends up dead. And the fact that happens, it tells the audience right up front, oh no, there's a third Sith that's trying to get into it. Now, I don't know, who am I betting on? One of these three is going to die. And I don't know who. And it creates this really interesting tension. And so even though the rule doesn't make a ton of sense, like it just seems arbitrary, from a story standpoint, the fact that it's there and it's never deviated upon, it creates a comfort for the characters, but it also creates this excitable tension of whenever that becomes a focal point of the story, you don't know how or when it's going to play out. You just know that it will. There's an inevitability to it. You're one of those three. You can run, you can hide, but at some point, some way, there can only be two.
Right.
And so that also is, it gets represented in so many different ways. But I think the core point here is that it anchors canon. So canon needs to live in a state where the rules are these kind of unspoken guidelines. Going back to what we were talking about the best universe as being a simulacrum for real life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in real life, one of the rules is you can't be immortal. You can't.
Yeah.
Right.
You cannot. If you die, you're not coming back.
Everyone's going to die. Right.
Yeah,
so now some people could say, yeah, you die, but then you get reincarnated. Right. Well, that's not the same as being immortal.
Well, that's a belief
right?
system, that's, yeah.
Exactly. But generally speaking, most people would agree that that's a hard, fast rule of life. You're going to die, right? Everything dies, right? And so living in that one constraint makes life very, very interesting.
Very interesting. There's no second chance.
Right. And so then you get to the next down layer, and it's like a lot of the other layers are applied by humans, right? Not the world, right? Humans say, oh, you have to pay your taxes or you'll go to jail. In some countries, you have to be part of the military or you'll something. And then there's all sorts of rules about what you can and can't do. You have to stop at a red light. You have to rules and rules and rules and rules.
Yeah, you can't steal.
But the immutable rule of our world is everything dies. And so all of the characters, all of us human beings have to live within that and try and figure out how to exist and thrive under that one rule. But in a fictional world, think about something like The Matrix, which is one of their rules is, it's not the spoon that bends, it's you, right? The spoon doesn't bend, right? You bend the spoon. And so that tells you right up front, okay, so it's a hard concept to grasp, but everything in this place called the Matrix, I have the power, if I can exert it, to bend reality, to shape reality. And then the whole question becomes, okay, how much power can a person have? How can the person gain the power to actually completely manipulate the Matrix if they aren't part of the Matrix itself? Right. And that becomes that's the whole gist of the story right there.
Right. It's the point.
So anyway, when you do this, one of the biggest things that you get going all the way back and bringing us to the concept of devotion is by doing this, you have built a universe in which there are all of these pillars, and coming back to this set of rules, the fact that you don't change the rules means that an audience can trust you, right? Mm-hmm. And if they can trust you, then you have security in a relationship. If you have security in a relationship, then you can start thinking about being loyal and moving to that place of devotion. But without that security in a relationship, if they feel like, oh, yeah, I saw this Batman movie and now they're saying Batman can do these things. Like, I don't know. I'm confused. Suddenly your love and devotion of Batman has been questioned because why? At the highest levels, the creators are starting to change the rules. So that's why they're called immutable. You need to stick to the rules. Now, you can always have, and it's such an interesting thing, is have characters that are constantly trying to change them. And the villains will always try and break them, right? That's what they're there for. But at the same time, by having them and telling stories around characters butting up against all of these rules, trying to bend them and break them, it goes back to that's how we live our lives on a daily basis. And it goes back to that very concept of relatability. And all of these things, as you can see, are totally entangled. This is to build a universe worthy of devotion is you don't say, oh, I'm going to pick pillar 2, 4, and 6. And I'm just going to do those.
No, it has to have all of that.
It has to have all of them. It has to be built with intentionality. And then there's the execution part of it, which is, well, you have to cast it well and you have to market it well. And those are all variables. Right. But if you don't take this thing, you don't even have a shot, in my opinion, at building something that is truly lasting. That's not to say that you can't make a movie that goes out and makes $1 billion, right? But
Yeah, but we're talking
where
about
is it?
long
Where
term.
is it 10 years later, right? Like,
Exactly.
is it
Exactly.
really that universe that people have devoted themselves to that becomes evergreen?
I wanted to kind of maybe tie all of this in and also give people some perspective. How do you go about storytelling, let's say for world building in comparison to like novel storytelling? So we can see kind of that difference of perspective
Right.
and context, if that makes
So
sense.
with telling a story, I may give some passing thought to, the world that the story takes place in. But if it's just a one-off, I'm not worried so much about the world, right? I'm going to kind of think about these kind of principles in the back of my mind, and I may sprinkle some stuff in there, but it's more kind of like building a set on a back lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you build it so that I can shoot at a certain angle, but you can't see that there's nothing back here, right?
Right.
And so it's more dealing with kind of the illusion that there's a world rather than actually taking the time to kind of build it out. Because I think a story has oftentimes a different purpose. It's to captivate somebody and
Right.
to transport them. And it may even be to kind of move with them. And they may say over the course of their life, I remember this story. It was so great. Right. But they haven't devoted themselves to that story. It just stimulates, and provokes a good memory for them. And that's a really great story. And a lot of movies and TV shows do that. It's like, oh, I love that. That was really cool. But I've moved on. Right.
Yeah.
World building done right doesn't allow you to move on. A piece of you lives in that world forever.
A piece of you lives in that world forever. That's a great line. And I think that relates perfectly to the Unioverse. So I have a question for you, which is, what was your thought process when you got first approached to write for the Unioverse? But I think if you could potentially tie that into how the world of the Unioverse is about, it's not, we're not going to be creating movies, games. The community is going to have a say, which I think is a substantial difference if you look at any other world, any other franchise in comparison to our universe. Yeah,
really good point. One of the things that was challenging about this was, again, having something like the Mass on Zero, or we call the Masso, at the center of the universe that unlocks this incredible power to just in the blink of an eye be transported to any new world. Part of the design of this was, what are the worlds? Can we let fans actually say, where I'd love to jump to? This world, right? And we want to build out this, and we have ideas, and here's some fan art and whatnot, that would inspire then a game developer to say, ooh, that looks really cool. We're going to build a whole game experience around this world. So that idea that the Unioverse is incomplete by design was all part of the thinking. It's all part of the architecture. So we've created the kind of the Mass on Zero, the engine that allows all of this to happen. And we've created the hub, which is, think of it as like the lobby where all of this, characters all kind of meet and whatnot. But to jump and go have stories and take place, we're going to put a few places out there just to give you a sense of what's possible. But this is a vast universe that we want people to start telling us about, these worlds that are worthy of jumping to. What's going on there? What's so interesting about it? Who lives there? What is the conflict? What is the history? Right? That can be part of the story canon, or it can be part of the experiential, like interactive landscape. And so that was all how we approached this from the very beginning, was build something that is deep enough and compelling enough to pull people in. But part of, in our estimation, the devotion is going to come from from two sources. Hopefully we've built all these pillars in and it has that quality of devotion. But the other aspect is the fact that I'm devoting myself and committing myself to help build it out, right? So my fingerprints are on this now. I am part of this in a way that's not just finding my identity and doing cosplay. I own part of this, literally and figuratively, this is mine as much as it is anyone else's in the community. That's a whole new configuration of the audience and the creator relationship. And that's frankly what's so exciting about it to me was, if the original challenge is build a universe worthy of devotion, but don't complete it. It's like, oh, okay, well that's a new one. But that's exactly what we were asked to do.
How difficult was it? Was it hard? I mean, I can't imagine trying to write a story that almost like you don't want it to have an end, but most importantly, you want it to have enough foundation where everybody can read it and be a part of it, but then go off and do their own things and own that, right?
Well, I will say this. It's not past tense. It's not how hard was it, it's how hard is it?
That's true.
It's very hard. It's very hard because we're still building it. I feel like we're on a train and reaching out and putting train tracks in front of us as we're racing down. Like,
Absolutely.
boy, we gotta. So we have, frankly, the thing that's making it possible and the thing that keeps me confident about where we're going is we have such an amazing team, right, of people that are all contributing to this, which is reinforcing the idea that, wow, I had this big thing go off in my head, this big bang idea. I put it down on paper. My original kind of thought was pretty spot on to what we have, except I added some other weird ideas. And then we've kind of like solidified around what the core ideas are. And then we've expanded and built those out as a group, which to me is just representative of what's going to happen exponentially when we open the doors to the larger community. Right. And I think that I can't wait to see what happens. Right. There's going to be people that take this world in directions that I could never have imagined. And that's frankly both humbling and incredibly thrilling.
I know that our community is really excited to hear the story, to read it, to really finally be able to read it, right? Like finally be able to know what the Unioverse is about. I know that we're obviously close to sharing that with everybody. Could you give us a little bit of an intro on how you've decided to first introduce the story and what kind of structure, maybe what kind of mindset should people step in when it's first released in a couple?
Well, let's go back to what we spoke about with regards to a universe worthy of devotion, that idea of aspirational heroes. The way that we're going to introduce the Unioverse is through one of our aspirational heroes, a character named Malcolm Orion. And again, without giving too much away, he is a character that embodies those three virtues of, curiosity, courage, and creativity. And he's given an opportunity to do something extraordinary for mankind. And what he does and how he goes about it, is very similar in certain ways to Luke Skywalker or Neo or any of these characters who are standing at the threshold of the unknown, pushing and wanting and risking everything, right? Their very lives to see what's on the other side, right? Literally and figuratively, and moving to a place where now that you found out, do you have the courage to keep pushing further, knowing that the deeper you go, the more dangerous things could become. Right. And how are you going to then stay alive? How are you going to turn this situation to your advantage? That's going to take incredible creativity and wits and whatnot. And so all of those things will be laid out for the community to see in the singular kind of story and experience of Malcolm Orion and how he finds his way to the Mason Zero and the hub.
Oh my God. I'm so excited. I'm excited. I can't imagine how excited the community must be. Do you have anything that you could potentially share with us from maybe like, I don't know, like a first page of your first story or something, something like that? Brian, do you have that by any chance?
Yeah, go ahead and throw that up.
Yes.
So this is the first 2-page. This was the brain dump. This was the big idea that I kind of like quickly like put up on paper. And you can just, it just reeks of pretension that I put an actual footnote on it. Like, I felt like this was super important. I needed to put a footnote because it was like this sub idea, but I didn't want to lose it. And I just think it's hysterical that I did that. That's the English lit major in me. But the funny thing is that this is the whole idea. Granted, there's some extra bells and whistles that I've thrown in here. I had this idea that there was an aspect to the Mass O that was not agnostic, that was more kind of interventional and actively benevolent in trying to help everyone who's involved or connected to the Mass on Zero to understand and put the pieces together of what happened before. And so that to me was a part of the process. And in talking, and rightfully so, we've kind of weeded that out. And we've said, we don't have to make that explicit. We don't have to make that something that is baked into the experience. What we have to do is we have to tell stories about characters who do that on their own, who naturally try and look for the connective tissue and look for putting pieces together as it relates to the greater mysteries, and more importantly, as it relates to their own lives and the gaps in their own existence, or the mysteries of a race that they come from. And so, if you read these 2 pages, you get this sense of, wow, this is the whole idea right there. Like, it's all encapsulated in, a handful of paragraphs and a ridiculous footnote. But it also has this other whole element that felt super important to me. Like it all came to me in this fever dream, but it just also shows you too, that you can strip that out, something like that. And it's still, the integrity of the central idea is still held. So I think that's I remember, and by no means am I comparing it to this, but I remember one day, going back to the Clone Wars experience, we're sitting at Skywalker Ranch, and this was like maybe the 3rd or 4th season that I was on the show, so everyone was, very friendly and whatnot. And I don't remember why it happened, but George brought in these 2 like notebooks, these like just little spiral bound notebooks, and just kind of dropped them on the table. And everyone's like, what's that? And he's like, well, that's Star Wars. And these were like the notebooks that when he got his Big Bang idea, he just hand wrote out basically the whole essence of Star Wars in a notebook.
Oh my God.
And so we were flipping through it and going, wow, like, and it's the same thing. There was a lot of stuff that never made it in, like part that was all like these other ideas that became ultimately superfluous. But the heart and soul of Star Wars was right there.
Was there
on a handful of pages, right, on paper.
Oh my God.
Again, I'm not making a comparison at all, right? I'm just saying that this is part of the creative process. Like, you get these big ideas, you try and capture them on paper in handwriting or in fonts. But what you end up doing is you say, okay, that's the starting point. That's the big chunk of clay that I threw on the wheel. Now I'm going to spend years, decades, maybe forever shaping, turning this into something.
It's so beautiful.
But now going back to the Unioverse, I think of that. It's almost like that movie. This is a ridiculous comparison, but I have to share it now. It's like that movie Ghost, where, I'm Demi Moore. I'm shaping the thing. I'm the creator. And then Patrick Swayze comes up behind me as the audience and starts shaping it with me. Right. It's like, oh my God, interesting. So now we got 4 hands on the clay. But that's kind of what's going to be going on. Right. There's going to be a lot of hands on the clay shaping it simultaneously. Who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what we're going to make?
Definitely. And thank you for sharing that. Because I think, and thank you for sharing for those 2 pages. Because I think the coolest part now is that, you know, everybody watching can pause and read it. And then when our first story snippets start coming out, it's as if they were you in Skywalker Ranch reading that notebook, right? It's not a notebook, it's 2 pages, right? But that's rare, right? Like, that's just rare. When do you really ever get the chance to do that? So I think I'm definitely going to be doing that. I hope everyone else will.
Well, this is ordinarily something I wouldn't do. But in the spirit of co-creation, I'm, it's like taking your shirt off at a party. It's like, why is he doing that? But I'm doing it really to just kind of say, hey, I'm showing you, like, this is how it all began. This is the humble origins of the Unioverse. It's just so you kind of get a sense of, oh, okay, I see what he was thinking, and I see what stayed, and I see what got jettisoned. That's cool. Now I have, I've kind of been to the source of where this went, and that may inspire people to build things out in different ways, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So that's kind of the whole point, is just to be authentic and be transparent.
Definitely.
And to bring a degree of humility to the creation of all of this.
Absolutely. And I think that's what the Unioverse is ultimately about, is we want to be transparent and make this as inclusive as possible, because it's not about us. It's about you. It's about the community. Right. Yep. And I'm really excited to see what people will come up with. This is incredible. Thank you so much. To close off, could you, what would be, maybe it could be 1, 2, or however many you want, but what are your world building secrets?
My secret, and this is kind of the main secret. The main secret is that to be a great world builder, you have to be able to switch point of views instantly, from the creator to the audience. You have to be able to constantly put yourself into the universe and say, why is this interesting? So this goes back to kind of what I was saying about, checking your ego at the door. It's the same thing whether you're doing it in a collaborative setting or whether you're doing it, sitting at home writing a 2-pager with a footnote. You need to say, okay, this is a really cool idea, but why would someone want to be here, right? And the ability to shift point of view and to be critical and to be judgmental of yourself and say, yeah, there's some cool things here, but I'm not going to devote myself to this, right? It's the ability to constantly have that dialectic conversation with yourself about why this is valuable, why this could be immersive, why I would devote myself to this. Right. That ability to be self-critical and to be able to shift point of view in a second, that to me is the secret. Because otherwise you're building something just for yourself. And I know that people have said, oh no, build what you know, build what you like. Right. That's the inspiration part of it. But then the actual development part of it needs to be much more, in my opinion, kind of responsive and inclusive, right? I can't just build a world where it's appealing to me and I haven't thought about why everyone else would want to come in. I can be inspired to create something at the idea level about what's appealing to me. That just comes very naturally. But once I want other people to come in, I need to be responsive and respectful about what is there for everyone else. Yeah. Right. So that I think that ability to immediately go from your 2-page, or whatever it is, your big brain dump of inspiration to, okay, now the hard work begins. And I need to build something that is going to attract, the entire planet, right? In the best sense. And why would they all come there? What are they all? What is drawing them there? And that's a difficult thing to do, because it's easy to get caught up in your own creativity and your own inspiration, and sure, feel satisfied with it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In a word, my secret is humility.
Thank you so much. This has been incredible. I think this is the best first episode of World Building Secrets, and I really can't wait for more for more secrets. And I'm really excited for our community to really see this and get that insight from you. And thank you for sharing. I know it's not easy to always, want to share your own personal work. So I'm sure they're going to appreciate it really much. And I'm really excited to have you on again, because I think there's still so much more that we can cover. For everybody listening, please comment, let us know what kind of questions you have, what you do want to hear. If you have any questions specifically for Brent, we'll definitely make sure to get those to him and hopefully answer them later on, or maybe even in our Discord. But again, this is a show for you guys. So whatever you guys want us to target and talk about, let us know. And there's many secrets to come.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Brent.
Absolutely. Thank you, Zuzy.